Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com with Licensing 101, talking about, licenses. Now, what does license mean? The word license just means permission, okay? So what happens here is that oftentimes there may be some reason that the government imposes some sort of barrier called a license. It says basically you can't do X without getting this license. So you need permission to do it. And it's often not as simple as just saying, hey, you can't do this. It's more, there's always some sort of extra clause. So for example, a driver's license, the roads, and to me, I always find the term public property as a misnomer. At the end of the day, it's probably more accurately thought of as government property. And the reason why I think that's a more accurate way, because it gives you more of an idea of who really ends up making the final decision, who really gets the gain and losses from that property, who's responsible for it. Because when you say public, it makes it sound like, someone can come to me for a problem with the road. I can't fix the pothole. I can't authorize fixing the pothole. I mean, I could fix the pothole, but I'm sure someone will get mad. But problem is, so government technically control the government roads. Okay, they may be available for public use, but at the end of the day, they're owned and controlled and operated by government. Okay, and because of that, government, like if I owned my own private road, I could control who uses my private road. So in that case, they create rules on who can use drive on their public roads. So basically, a lot of people misconstrue driver's licenses. It's not a permission to drive. You can, if you have your own private road system in your backyard, you can drive on that as much as you want. No one's going to stop you. But in order to drive on the public roads or the government-owned roads, you need a license. So that's kind of how they kind of get at you. Usually there's some sort of use of government resources that they then use as a lever to create the restriction. Or sometimes or sometimes they really just do get in the way of you doing something, oftentimes with occupational licensing. Okay, and the way occupational licensing usually works is they create some sort of regime where, like for example, in the financial industry, the way it works is that there are laws that force broker-dealers in the financial industry to become members of organizations called SROs, self-regulatory organizations. They're not part of the government. They're not government funded. They're these independent bodies, but you have to be a member of them in order to do brokerage business. And it's that entity, that self-regulatory organization, that then requires a license for your employees to do certain functions, and if not, that organization will then punish you for not following those rules. Okay, so basically, again, this point I'm trying to make right now is sort of the functioning of licenses and what licenses are and how they're set up. I think that's important because a lot of people misconstrue sort of the legal basis for these being set up, but despite the legal basis, there's the economic issue with it, in the sense that you're creating barriers to taking, generally oftentimes, actions that improve people's lives. So if we're talking about occupational licenses put a cost on participating in industry. So oftentimes you already have to go to school, to a college or something like that, and you spend a lot of money doing that. And then afterwards you have to get these licenses that oftentimes may require you to take another 3 or 6 months with no work, having to pay for resources, pay for courses, and can keep up with your cost of living in the meantime. That's not something that the poorest people can survive. So the poorest people don't get the ability to enter those industries because they can't have a license. And as more and more industries require licenses, that kind of labor mobility or immobility becomes greater and greater and greater. And that's kind of the big issue with licensing. I mean, when you need licenses that braid hair, it becomes really excessive. And people always cite some sort of safety. And really what it comes down to is that licenses are used in the same way guilds were used hundreds of years ago, where they would limit the supply of labor for a particular function because it made people who did have the license or who were in the guild get paid more, because you were creating artificial scarcity. So if I'm saying only these people can provide you this service legally, well then you have to pay them what they get paid. Okay, because I'm not going to let you go to anybody else. That's essentially what happens with a license. So it increases the costs of living because you're increasing the cost that people have to pay for things, which means those are resources that don't get used elsewhere. You're reducing immobility of people's labor to find better uses of their labor or find better opportunities. And also just the loss of time. Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't matter the quality of people. Oftentimes, licenses don't measure the quality that somebody knows how to do something. So, for example, a securities license, and I know this personally because I train people for securities licensing, the purpose of the licensing is less to figure out whether you're a good financial professional or not, and more to make sure that you're aware of the rules. So that way, later on, if you break the rules, you don't have a leg to stand on as far as saying, hey, I was ignorant of the rules. And generally, this happens because the rules have gotten so complicated that there are extra steps have to be taken to make sure you understand the rules. So oftentimes when that's an aspect of why you have licensing, probably the rules have gotten too complicated. But far as making sure, but there is a legitimate concern that people want to know that, hey, their doctor's not going to kill them on the table. But a license isn't the only way to make sure that someone's good. Okay, there's lots of ways to certify quality. There's certifications. So, for example, in the financial industry, when you're looking for a really quality financial professional, you're not looking for what licenses they have. You look at whether they're a certified financial professional or a chartered financial analyst. These are certifications and credentials that are done through third parties who have certain rigorous training programs. They've made a real effort to build the brand for their program and to show that there's actually quality results from going through their training programs, that they've become industry recognized. So they had a financial incentive because people won't pay to take their tests. People won't pay to go through their courses unless they make sure that there's results. So they have a profit incentive to make sure that their stamp of approval meets quality to keep their reputation up. Okay, so that's one angle. Another angle is insurance. If you're going to buy insurance, and if you're a doctor, you're probably going to need to buy liability insurance. They're going to probably want you to take, depending on what your practice is doing. So if you're a surgeon, probably absent traditional licensing, the insurance company is going to want some sort of assurance that they're not going to be paying for a bunch of malpractice lawsuits because you are not a qualified doctor. So they would have a very huge interest in developing some sort of certification process to make sure that doctors who get malpractice insurance for being a surgeon, go through the proper, credentialing. And that credentialing would probably become something that people will look for. There's also just normal review websites and peer reviews, which at the end of the day is still how most people do things, where they look for people they trust to tell them who do they trust to go to and go to them. Despite all the regulations in the world, people still go with, what did Bob tell me down the street? But whether it's a certification by some sort of third party, and whether the incentive is because it allows you to get better customers, like a certified financial planner, a CFP license, or whether it may help you get cheaper insurance, there'll be economic incentives for people to look for other types of credentialing, other types of way of certifying quality of services and goods, especially for the most sensitive and legally most liability holding type professions. So bottom line is, when you have mandatory government licensing, creates immobility of job or immobility of labor. It creates a cost in time and resources. It basically eats up resources out of the economy that could be used for other things. But absent those things, it doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be ways to certify quality, and nor would there be not incentives to do so. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com. Have a great day and enjoy.